Question. How do I get good SEO? We're staying on the topic of SEO. How do I get good SEO for multiple locations within one website? It's something we work with a lot of clients on, and we actually have a lot of clients we're doing this for right now. Couple different things. One, when Google searches your website, there's a couple different things I'm going to go into here. When Google crawls your website, it's looking for things that identify where somebody's located, whether it's attached, where we would typically recommend you attach on your contact page or somewhere the map that's generated on your Google business page. That gives Google an idea where you're at. It instantly tells them where you're located, what your region is, things like that. So you definitely want to talk about the area that you're located. The other thing is, if you want to be SEO'd for very specific locations, let's say you're in an area that's kind of in between 4 or 5 other major areas, and you do business in all 4 or 5 of those areas, but you've got to do the SEO on your website. So you're like, okay, how do I have good SEO for 4 or 5 locations when I'm actually the city that I'm listed in, like on my contact page where my shop is at, is not in any of those 4 or 5. I actually go out to people and I do work there. So a couple different things you could do. First of all, consider having a page on your website for each of those 4 or 5 locations. So in addition to your contact page, create a page for your services in each one of those areas, a whole page that actually is specific to that, where it's not just a copy and paste. You've actually created a page. You're using images from that area. You're using, you're using wording about that area. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, you're in Cincinnati, Ohio, but you service customers all the way up in Dayton, Ohio, and down in Lexington, Kentucky, and Louisville, Kentucky. You service customers all those places. So while your address is in Cincinnati, and Google may pick up on that because you're attached to your Google map and everything like that, you want to also be optimized for Dayton, Louisville, and Lexington. You probably want to create 3 additional pages on your website that talk about your products and services in Louisville, Kentucky, in Lexington, Kentucky, in Dayton, Ohio, so that you actually have a page on your website specifically talking about your product and services in those areas, so that Google has something when they crawl your website to say, oh, he does these things in Dayton, Ohio as well. He does these things in Louisville, Kentucky as well. That's going to give Google something to hang on to. When Google crawls your website, if there's nothing on there about Dayton, Ohio, how is Google going to know to populate you up in the search results for Dayton, Ohio? There's nothing on your website that talks about Dayton, Ohio. They're not going to automatically assume, because Dayton is 45 minutes away from Cincinnati, that they should show you in the Dayton results. In fact, they probably will assume to not show you in the Dayton results because you're down in Cincinnati. So you actually have to create some content on your website, some anchor points on your website, for lack of a better term, that tell Google that, hey, we do this work in Dayton as well. We do this work in Louisville as well. We do this work in Lexington as well. If you do that, you give Google a little bit of something to hang on to. The other thing you can do, but you have to do it properly, is to create a Google business listing in those areas. That's going to be a little bit more costly because you actually have to create an actual presence there, whether that is through a shared office space or something like that. If you can actually create a Google business location in Dayton and verify that location, and that won't work typically for post office boxes or UPS store boxes. You actually have to create like a shared office thing to where you can actually say, hey, I have a location that I can do business out of in Dayton, to get it verified. Then you can actually have a Google business listing there. And you can actually, on that Dayton page of your website, include the Dayton Google business map and things like that. That's going to allow you to get a little bit more traction there. So if you're in an area where you do business with a variety of places, there's a couple things you have to do that are going to help you get traction there. You just can't assume, especially if those areas are like what I'm mentioning, Dayton, Louisville, Lexington. Those are populated areas that probably have people in those areas that are doing your product or service too. So if you're in Cincinnati, you're not going to come up at the top of the list above people that already are showing that they're in Dayton, Louisville, or Lexington. You've got to create a situation where you're in the mix in those locations, or you're not going to come up. So I've given you a couple ideas on that. There's a couple other ways to do it. I wouldn't waste your time with UPS stores and things like that, or trying to get verified with a post office box. Google is pretty savvy to that. And in most cases, when people try to do that, I see that those things get not approved, and Google will not allow you to verify a Google business location there with a post office box or a UPS store box or something like that. So I would say save your time if you're not willing to actually set up a shared office space or things like that, where you don't have access to a shared office space that you could use in those areas. You're typically not going to be very successful getting those locations verified. So hope that helps. Again, it's very important if you're in one of those situations that you create something that Google can identify with that shows that you do business in those areas. I saw some things come in, so let me make sure. So Tim asked, on those pages, do you have a drop down for them, or just ready and publish, be able to find them? Tim, it depends. If you want people to see that you do business in those areas from the front of your website, a lot of times, like on your Contact Us tab, you could have like what we would call a waterfall menu that comes down that shows that you have a Dayton, Lexington, Louisville location. And then if you click on that, it'll take you to that specific page. So in that case, it would be visible from the front end publicly. Sometimes you could just create the content on your website and not put it in your menu structure. It's still there when Google crawls it, whether it's in the menu structure or not. So you don't necessarily have to put it in the menu structure, although maybe you would want to. I'm not sure unless you want to hide the fact why you might want to hide that. But the most important thing is the content is on your website and it's published. Now, whether you want to show it up front or not is a personal preference thing. Some people do, some people don't. It says, and he asks the follow-up question, the menus can get overwhelmed, so that's why I ask. Again, yeah, I think a lot of times what clients we've done will actually have a locations tab in their menu, and they'll list all of them underneath that. But again, the most important thing is that the page is published and it's part of your website. It doesn't need to be in the menu structure. That's going to come down to website design and what your preferences are. But if the web page is published and your website's been submitted to Google to be crawled, that page will be crawled and it'll be part of your overall website SEO, whether it's in the menu structure or not. So it doesn't need to be in the menu structure to work from an SEO perspective.